Okay. Thank you very much for inviting me to give this talk for several reasons. I'm actually very happy. It's the first time the student body has actually asked me to give a talk. And as I just explained, I'm very happy to talk in front of students. I mean, I can also talk in front of faculty, but obviously we should be talking to our students and discussing with our students. And obviously we should also discuss our research with our students. But I'm also, I don't know, some of you are aware of it, but probably not everybody, you haven't said it. I'm actually leaving IIT Madras. So I'm leaving IIT Madras at the end of this month. About the reasons, I won't go in too much, some people know also. But I'm also moving to a new position at the University of Oslo, which I will start on the 1st of December 20, next December. And I've just been busy the whole day to clean out my apartment and clean out, I've really been sweating working with movers, clean out my apartment and clean out my office. And I'll actually be moving tomorrow around noon. So this is actually my very last thing I'm doing at IIT Madras. I'm very happy that we found this time. I think it's also very, very fitting, very suitable that we found this time. And this is obviously something that I'm very much engaged with, right? Like even though I'm leaving IIT Madras, I mean, I'm also leaving a part of myself behind it. I've been here for 8 years. And specifically, if you write about the history of an institution, of your own institution, right? Like you also get a different kind of belonging, you get a different kind of identity. So yeah, that's it. Coming to my topic, engineering education, Cold War diplomacy, India, Germany, and the establishment of IIT Madras. When I interviewed here, I think it was 9 years ago, I interviewed for the faculty position. I knew about the IITs because my wife had started and not completed a PhD. Yes, that's possible. Start and not complete a PhD. As I know some of my PhD students live here at IIT Bombay, and then moved on to take it in the US. So I knew about the IITs, but what I didn't know about was that IIT Madras was actually started as an Indo-German collaboration. So I was kind of like, you can say this almost kind of like autobiographical, right? Like you come here as a German, I'm originally from Germany, right? Like, what are you doing here at IIT Madras, teaching science and technology? Find out that you're not the first one, right? Like you're probably asking that question. So there has been right from the beginning, there have been professors from Germany teaching science and engineering here. And then I started getting involved in that project. And part of that project, I've also been working with, some of you might be aware of that as well, the archive of IIT. So that has been one of my big projects, which is also close to my heart, right? Like, because it's obviously it's still ongoing and it will continue. We're just about setting up the archive premises. And that obviously is also very important, right? Like, because if you think about history writing in India, there is always a problem of sources, right? Like, if you want to write in India, I mean, like, my PhD students know that, right? Like, a lot of the social science and humanities research that we do at IIT Madras and other places in India, we do what I call kind of mixed methods, right? Like it's kind of mixed martial arts to try to pen your way through it. And specifically for historians, right? Like Madhu knows this very well also, right? Like that we work also a lot with, for example, ethnographic methods because archival material is not readily available, right? Like, and this is also something that came out here. So also before I start going further, most of the archival material which I actually used in my research I actually found in Germany where it was kind of well organized. And then I've been working a lot with the Heritage Center here who has a great photo collection. So most of these photos, like the gorgeous photo that I totally love, right? Like the German minister together with the first director of IIT Madras at the junction of Bonn and Delhi Avenue, and you all know Bonn and Delhi Avenue, right? Yeah, but I think it's also when I've been teaching one of the standard or like one of the courses that I've actually floated here and I've been teaching for years is science and technology in the 20th century. right? Like starting from whether you take the long, I usually take the long 20th century, then you start in the 1860s, 70s, or probably India in the 1850s. There's certain markers like India would be the Mutiny, Germany would be the Franco-Prussian War, the Victorian times in the UK, but India really the Mutiny at the time over like the new phase times until usually until the contemporary, and at some point you come to the Cold War, right? And then I always say, look, there is no better place to learn about science during the Cold War than IIT Madras, right? Like you can just look at our, and this is obviously also how our own local history is connected to the larger developments, the larger historiography, right? Like so, the two major events that led to the Indo-German collaboration was actually the end of the Second World War and Indian independence. And it's not a coincidence that they happened almost around the same time. Obviously, if you read through that history, you find out that 45, 47, it's very much linked to the war. And if you talk about science and technology and the Second World War, the biggest demonstration has obviously been the droppings of the nuclear bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945, right? Like the biggest demonstration, which also obviously changed kind of things forever. And obviously also in India, right? Like, and I'll come back very soon to that. But even before that, right? Like this is Vannevar Bush's Science, the Endless Frontier, July 1945. Published says nothing about the atomic bombs. First, they haven't been dropped yet. Obviously, Vannevar Bush was the advisor to the American president. He knew everything about the Manhattan Project, but it was a secret project then, so it wasn't mentioned. But even beyond that, right, like science and technology played a critical role on all fronts during in the course of the Second World War, right? Like which also kind of set the stage. Obviously, the Second World War set the stage for the Cold War, where you had like the Western Bloc and the Eastern Bloc, right? Like the Western Bloc led by the U.S., the Eastern Bloc led by the Soviet Union, and very importantly, India under Nehru as the leader of the non-alignment movement, right? Like so, India was a very important, and we come back to that, right? Like that actually had a lot to do with setting up the IITs and how the IITs were set up, right? So this doesn't talk about nuclear science at all, even though we are just at the edge of the atomic age. Atomic age is the starting, but it's kind of science the endless frontier. We can solve all kinds of problems with science and technology, and that was really the belief. And the important thing is not even beyond the rivalry of the Soviet Union and the US. They both believed in it. They also both believe very strongly, and this is also very different from today, a very strong state intervention. So if you look at the Manhattan Project, part of what made the Manhattan Project possible was the New Deal and the kind of infrastructure that was set up in the US during the New Deal, like this huge dam projects, right? Like that made available hydropower. So if we think about India after 45 or after 47, and the kind of idea there we're talking about the dams at the new temples of India, it was the kind of models that came both from the Soviet Union and from the US. This is, if you want to develop your country, this is how you have to do it. You have to set up this kind of large techno-scientific infrastructure. Right? This is the way to modernization. This is about modernization theory. Most of it, the literature you find today talks about the US, but the important thing is that the USSR was probably even more a model for countries like India. And the important thing is also to remember that you didn't even have to be a socialist to do that. Actually, a lot of even like kind of more right-wing governments kind of tried to follow that because the Soviet Union was a centralist organized state. And if you were a government, kind of a central government from Delhi, and you want to develop your country, you can take the model of the Soviet Union 5-year plans, right? Like, and obviously after the war, we're talking about the time here that the USSR came out as one of the winners of the Second World War, and then also with the Sputnik shot, right, like 57, which is right around the time I come back there, actually the leader in the space. Right? Like, so obviously the Soviet Union was a very could obviously compete with the US, right, in this. Then, yeah, we know Homi Bhabha as here at the Concord Gordon generator, which is like an electrostatic generator for nuclear physics, who became then the leader of this kind of state-run Indian nuclear world, right? Like we are in Bombay here, we have Nehru and Bhabha, and also here Bhabha at Atoms for Peace, right? Like there's a lot of what we call today science diplomacy going on. I come back to that word science diplomacy also, right? Like where science on one side, setting up scientific institutions, and diplomacy on the other side go hand in hand. This again, 1955, where the US actually opening up to nuclear collaboration, and then make actually Homi Bhabha as the chairperson, the chairman of the Atoms for Peace conference, right? Like kind of again putting this kind of picture of India as the leader of the non-alignment movement, like with Bhabha actually being kind of chairing the Atoms for Peace conference in Geneva. Then we have Derek de Solla Price here, who has actually coined the term big science in his article Little Science, Big Science. And big science is actually not, as you might think, if you think about the nuclear program, about big installations, but kind of an exponential, what he's showing here in this year's scientific journals and these kind of things, an exponential growth of the scientific community. And this is what's actually happening, what's actually taking place in the aftermath of the Second World War. All these kind of countries look at, oh, we have to go into this kind of techno-scientific development. We have to put lots and lots and lots of money into this, and we have to have a techno-scientific workforce, or back then, yeah, manpower, right? Like you can still say it's mostly men, right? Like, I show some women, some of the first female students at IIT Madras. But so this was really the backdrop, also for India, right? Like, and to understand this time and the kind of urgency, right? Like, how would India leapfrog ahead in this kind of scenario, right? Like, obviously, they would have to invest into nuclear installations, but also in other institutions. I mean, the nuclear never played a role at IIT, right? Like, I've never seen anything, right? Like the two nuclear at IIT Madras. But obviously, it was about all kinds of sectors. Right, like you had this kind of collaboration with different countries. Hindustan Machine Tools, HMT up in there, right? And in Bangalore, or here the integrated coach factory, which was a collaboration with the Swiss company. So there was a lot of like cooperations between both countries from the Western Bloc and countries from the Eastern Bloc that collaborated in this kind of, what you call this the Nehruvian times, or call this Nehruvian science or techno-science development, who collaborated with Indian companies, like the Indian government to set up, to modernize existing institutions and to set up new institutions. And it was also at this kind of idea that after independence, kind of like a blank slate. People didn't really look, and you know that kind of brought some kind of complications afterwards, right? Like, you can also say that a lot of these kind of promises of the kind of Nehruvian times and science and technology during the Nehruvian times didn't really got fulfilled, right? Like if you think about the kind of social transformation institutions like the IIT should bring, right? Like because the belief was really with, and specifically if you read Van Bush, right? Like you can even clear all the social problems. Right? Like, and things like casteism, caste society, whatever, that was just disappeared, right? Like, you think about kind of this scientific temper idea of Nehru, right? Like, Nehru used the concept of scientific temper, that would really be. This would be a new time where all this kind of traditional religious forces, whatever, all this kind of stuff would just disappear, and we would be living because science is egalitarian, it's universal, it would kind of make our societies also more just societies. And I'm not going to talk about this today, but just to give you a background, right? Like about the kind of promises this kind of development would bring, right? Like, and this is where we have this meeting between Konrad Adenauer, Theodor Heuss, who has been the first president who's in the middle, and Jawaharlal Nehru, and 1956. So 1956 is obviously in the middle of this period. I have to say something about the situation in Germany, because Germany actually, and if you're in India, you can say they face a situation which is actually not so unsimilar to India, because in India you have partition between Pakistan and India, right? Like in India and in Germany, you had the partition between West and East Germany after the war. That was the situation. There was a West German state, there was an East German state, Federal Republic, West German state, and the DDR, which was the East German state. This is the West German state, and this is right after partition, and it's absolutely vital. So the West German state just became independent, got recognized from a lot of countries, also from India. But what they want to do is they want to prohibit other countries or keep other countries from recognizing East Germany. It's a little bit like Taiwan and China, right? If you have diplomatic relationships with China or with Taiwan, we're not going to have some with you, right? Like you're going to get punished. So this was kind of the situation of the West German government, that they try to avoid Nehru, basically, or the Nehruvian government, to acknowledge East Germany. And actually they won. They got what they want. Right? Like, so this is science diplomacy. We mobilized. So what happened in this meeting, okay, I should say, what happened during this meeting is, so India was looking for partners for all these kind of projects. And also one of these projects was setting up the IITs, the Indian Institute of Technology, which had been discussed for a long time. And they looked for partners. And actually, after Kharagpur, which was set up with the help of UNESCO, and I'll come back to that, the second one was set up with the help of the Soviet Union. So that was actually, they went to the Soviet Union. Obviously, during this time, you see, I mean, it's becoming a leading power. It's just around the same time of the Sputnik shot, right? Like at this meeting, obviously they tell the West Germans, oh, the Soviets have already promised one, right? Like, and then they see themselves in a competition. So it's a very typical competition of the Cold War. The Cold War was also fought as a war of the regimes, and a lot of people would even say that, right? Like they said, like the German faculty that came here, they said we have to be better than the Soviets. We can do better. We can train engineers better. The German IIT has to be better than the Soviet IIT. But they were even competing with the Americans when Kanpur was set up, right? So this was kind of the situation here. India wanted a partner to set up a scientific institution or techno-scientific institution or training institution basically to train Indian engineers. And we have now this very clear idea that the IITs, that's where the engineers would come from who would industrialize it, right? So Germany was obviously had a long reputation for get them in, and the Germans want the Indians not to recognize, or the West Germans want the Indians not to recognize East Germany as a sovereign state and representative of Germany, and kind of both get what they want. Obviously, this is not the only, this is a small project, but actually a large amount of German aid at that point goes to India. A large portion of German aid goes to India. But this is how aid works, right? Like you give aid and you use it as a kind of diplomatic, political tool, right? It's called soft power in the game, right? But this is a very clear example of science diplomacy. Then what the Germans do is they send a technical mission. This year they meet in Madras in November 56. But they go all over India, right? Like, and the Germans finally agree. I mean, they would actually like to set up their IIT in Delhi because they want to be close to where the political power is. But and they definitely don't want to go to Kanpur. So much that finally, right? Like, but actually they learn about it from the newspaper, right? Like the Indians don't really inform them, right? Like they just decide it should be Madras, right? Like, and then so you have these kind of people. AG is like a big electrical company in Germany. So these came around and they planned Madras, and then they put somebody in charge. A very interesting person, Robert Kraus, the person here in the middle, this is white in the middle, who was actually a professor before at Kharagpur, a professor of mechanical engineering, and they put him in charge to set this up. Kraus was actually a very interesting person. Unfortunately, nothing is written about him because before the war he was in China. He was at Tongji University for most of his career, so he had kind of like Asia experience. Then he was hired, as I said, this was kind of a UNESCO project, but they actually hired several German faculty, Otto Walch, Ernst Weingärtner, Horst Tischner, who I came across in some other connections. So these are all engineering professors and Roland Kraus. So they brought some international faculty to help setting this up, and then Robert Kraus was the guy who they picked to set up the utility planning IIT Madras. But then the politics continue, right? Like this is Theodor Heuss, not president anymore, but still on a kind of mission, comes to IIT Madras. So he was the first of the German presidents. We come back to several of them, right? But then also development doesn't go as fast as it should. By like 59 it opens, but whenever you look into this, my wife's actually setting up an institution right now, right? We kind of open in steps. So formally, the opening was in summer 59, when also the first students were taken in. But at that point, the first batches were actually taught at, I think, at the Central Leather Research. There were several institutions actually that were around here, right? Like already, and they're still around, like technical institutions where the first batch of students were taught while buildings were set up. This actually also from the German buildings were set up. This actually also from the German archives, but elsewhere all the focus comes from the Heritage Center. The workshops that are being set up at 61, right? Like it's only workshops that are being set up at 61, right? Like it's only in the early 60s that also the hostels are being set up and all this kind of stuff. And the Germans first actually think that would be done in 4 years. They only wanted to stay for 4 years, and then they would be gone. They ended up staying until 74, and it was kind of naive, right? Like, but also, you really have to say, I mean, it's so the idea of setting up or Germany helping to set up IIT Madras came out of the Foreign Office, right? Like, and what's the expertise of the Foreign Office to set up a university? It's not very big, right? Like, and they actually don't do a very good job in the first years, and they're almost. But in the mid 60s, they realized they have to double down, right? Like they cannot lose this because it's the Cold War. They're in the kind of competition with the others, and Germany cannot lose this. So the Germans are kind of like, there's something we are good at. It's technical education, right? Like so, we cannot like kind of fail on this year. So they're doubling down. They're pouring in much more money. And part of the thing is also that in the beginning, they actually don't want to set up a research university. They want to set up a more practically oriented college. In the beginning, they actually don't want to set up a research university. They want to set up a more practically oriented college, and I'll come back later to that. That also had consequences for the curriculum. The first one that was proposed, because they thought actually Indians should work with their hands, right? Like instead of working with their brains. So if you want engineers, obviously you should work with your brains as well, but the hands should go together with the brain. Right? Like that's why actually the workshops were very central. There were some of the first places, obviously now the workshops are being torn down, but there were actually some of the first places that were set up. Another German president is actually Lübke visiting IIT Madras in '62. They also make a small film. If there will be a German audience, I will show you the film, but and you understand better. Unfortunately, it's not subtitled. So part of the Indo-German agreement is also scholarships for Indian specifically faculty, but also technicians to be trained in Germany, and then German faculty to come to teach at IIT, but also technicians to be trained in Germany, and then German faculty to come to teach at IIT Madras, right? Like, and a lot of the equipment, the buildings were built by the Indians. A lot of the equipment came from the West German government. If I say Germans, I always mean West Germany here. We can come back to this in the questions of that. And this is also where we have the photo of this visit a year later. Walter Scheel, who actually eventually also becomes a German president, but at that point he's still a minister for economic cooperation and development. And Bonn Avenue, because back then the Federal Republic, the capital of the Federal Republic was Bonn, which is very close to the French border and not Berlin, right? So Walter Scheel comes for a visit and meets Sengupta, and then he is also very happily working, engaging in carpentry work. I also kind of tried to find out, and I found out that his father was actually real right, so his father was actually a craftsman, right? And but this was also the idea. So in the first year of IIT back then, if you would study the first year, you would have a curriculum of 1 week workshop and 1 week classroom. So one of the weeks you would spend in the workshop and you would actually do copy. Right? Like this is how we do all the IIT students. And this is from a school 3 women who are very actively engaging. You see them sweating, right? Like sweat on campus, right? Like 3 women. I think this is in the early 70s. Filing, right? Like filing was really one of the important things. And it was very essential to German, traditional German technical education, right? Like that you should have workshop experience, you should actually, in Germany, it was like that, that they would be sent out in industry, right? Like, and they're doing an apprenticeship and then they would come back. Which actually, I think was a much better model. Here, the Germans decided Indian workshops, they're not good enough, right? Like, so you kind of had this, you set up a German craft workshop here instead of like sending people out into the Indian reality of how things are done on the workshop, right? And so, yeah, so this was like the training workshop. So the main goal of the workshop was really